I'm Jenny McGill. I'm the Assistant Director of the Economic and Political Development Concentration here at SIPA, and one of a team of co-organizers, both faculty and students, for this event. I was looking at some materials from the grant application that we submitted to get funding for the event, and it was about a year ago. In fact, just a week from today that we submitted the proposal. So we've been working on this for a year and are really excited to see it happening, and delighted that all of you could join us. So we'll start with some opening remarks from the dean of our school, Dean Robert Lieberman, and the director of our Economic and Political Development Concentration, Jose Antonio Ocampo. And then we'll be moving into the first of several panels, and we'll talk more about that later. So with that, I'd like to invite Dean Lieberman to open the event for us.
Good morning. Welcome to Columbia. On behalf of the School of International and Public Affairs, I want to say how pleased we are to be hosting all of you and to be hosting this conference. Excuse me. And I want to thank especially the sponsors of the conference, our concentration in economic and political development, which is very ably led by my colleague, the possibly future president of the World Bank, Jose Antonio Ocampo. We say that every chance we get. And Jenny McGill. They're one of the sponsors of the conference, our specialization in international media advocacy and communications, which we call IMAC. We hope Apple doesn't notice and sue us for copyright infringement. And a number of our terrific student groups here at SIPA, Net Impact, the Columbia Impact Investing Initiative, known colloquially around here as CI3, and the New Media Task Force, and the Initiative for Policy Dialogue, which has also generously supported the event. Well, I don't need to tell you. In fact, I would probably learn from you if I were able to stay for the day. But I don't need to tell you that social innovation has become an extremely important theme recently in debates on international development. Innovation, technical change, those kinds of trends have long been associated with development. More recently, green revolution technologies and new vaccines, drug therapies, all kinds of technological innovations and developments have improved food security, improved health globally, extended lives, and improved the quality of life in many developing countries. And this recent bubbling of interest in social innovation has been influenced by a number of extremely important global trends in domestic policy reform and information technology, social business and enterprise, development assistance, a whole range of both academic fields and fields of practice. So the innovation bug, I think, has infected all of the development world, and only for the better. I think it's fantastic that we're here talking about this in such a concerted and comprehensive way today. What we're doing here today has a lot of important links here at SIPA, with not just the concentrations and specializations in our curricular units that I've already mentioned, but also the things we do here at SIPA on social policy, urban policy, social enterprise and social entrepreneurship, new media, communications, all of which have implications for development in the developing world. The conference here builds on the success of lots of other panel discussions. EPD, as we call our development concentration, is just a bewildering frenzy of exciting activity that's been building up toward this conference for a long time. And as I said before, the conference resonates with the work of many of our most active and engaged student groups, which is one of the great things about our community here at SIPA, is that what happens around the school and around the building is not just based due to the efforts of faculty, but is really driven by a phenomenally interesting and engaged and exciting student body as well. So I know you have a very full day. I won't spend too much more time in keeping you from it, but in addition to what's going on in today's conference program, the conference organizers are planning to produce some policy briefs on the outcome of the day's conversations, which we hope will not only showcase the important work on development and media and communications that go on here at SIPA, but also provoke further conversation, further research, and further discussion on this important topic. I want to welcome you all again. I want to thank Jose Antonio and Jenny and Anya and a number of other people, lots of other people who were involved in organizing today's conference, the student organization, CI3, Net Impact, the New Media Task Force. I wish I could spend some of the day with you. I'll have to dash in just a few moments. But again, on behalf of SIPA, I want to welcome you here, and I wish you a terrific day, and I look forward to seeing the outcome of your deliberations. Thanks very much.
Many thanks to Dean Lieberman, who's an expert on social policy, domestic policy here. And now I'd like to ask Professor Jose Antonio Campo if he could talk a bit more about some of the themes underlying this event.
Well, thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Dean Lieberman. And let me start by, of course, welcoming all the speakers that have come especially for this event today. To thank, well, I would say in particular, Jenny and Sarah Minar, who launched this idea, worked on it for a year, with many increasing network of cooperation, including Anya Schriffing here also with us, and many others, and particularly, as Dean Lieberman already mentioned, the student groups that have supported this venture. I came to learn, because this is not my field, so let me just present a few remarks written by my colleagues, more than my own, but who raise actually some issues and some questions that are interesting, and actually place some question marks based on last year's series that we organized on this topic. So let me start by pointing out that this conference also uses innovations. So you can see here in the bottom of this that questions can be asked by Twitter. So that I said different mechanisms, so it really try to raise the participatory character of this event. In the World Cafe participatory vision exercise that will take place after launch, we'll also have a space for broader participation. At the end of the conference, we'll have a visual world tour of 18 social innovations and a special performance by SIPA faculty of live world music. Now, as an international and public affairs school, we are interested in questions related to building political, social, and economic partnerships that are strong enough, yet versatile enough to tackle the increasingly difficult problems of the 21st century. We are interested to hear from the conversations of how formal partnerships and informal norms of collaboration between sectors, discipline, institutions, and cultures are also social innovations. In the development field, when we speak about innovations, we tend to refer to innovations from the donor side, in financing for development, in policy coherence, in aid delivery. The many distinguished panelists we will hear from today have been changing this conversation, informing our policy and practitioner frameworks with new models of collaboration and engagement derived from and driven by local communities, social entrepreneurs, and institutions like Mondragón, Instituto Palmas, Ashoka, and others. I would like to ask each of you to bring a critical lens to the different conversations we will be having today on social innovations for development. For example, let's think about how to better apply what we learned from the past to to really listen to the present generation and how to plan for the future inspired by these lessons and social innovation series. Actually, I have a little obsession here from the past that from my youth age, in which I was a lot inspired by the cooperative movement, which in a sense is one form of social cooperation that has a long historical roots. And although that is an old institution, it has many ways of innovating and being used for innovation. And you can see actually, for example, in the world of inclusive finance, which is one of the roles of innovation, that there is, of course, the role of micro entrepreneurs, microfinance, etc., that has played a very important role. But many parts of the developing world is actually credit unions that play that role of spreading the access to credit throughout the world. So there might also be all forms of organization that can be brought to the task of innovating for the purposes exactly on the same basis of this being, in a sense, a bottom-up approach to development, which is what this is about. Well, when many of us think about social innovations, we tend to think about policies like conditional cash transfers or social impact bonds, impact investing, and the many creative ways the private, public, and social sectors have learned to harness resources to fund ideas with a collective social benefit. When we apply these trends to the developing world, we are forced to ask ourselves, does innovation or social innovation require a reasonable margin of abundance? What is about social innovations that requires capital, technology, institutions, industry? And I must say, and this I think is very important, how it relates to the policy framework, to the government policy framework, so that the government can actually enhance this process, but also become a critical partner, in a sense, to leverage these efforts and turn them into major efforts. I'm inspired here for one of the little, let's say, frameworks that I have known, which was actually a long-term research that was done by the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America that Nora Rey de Marulanda is going to present later today, in which actually this issue was a major issue that was raised in that research. How to public policy, I mean, the experience is that when public policy uses social innovations to leverage major changes in policy, it does matter, and I think that increases the possibility of this framework being used for broader development goals. Well, we have all witnessed, and some, of course, longer than others, the increasing obligation in a development practice to quantify our results and impacts and try to reap the benefits from economies of scale. When are these instances when replicability or scale does not matter? So I think this is an interesting question. Again, my previous remark was, when public policy can use to multiply effects, to make a scale out of the individual efforts which come from social organizations of different character. But are there cases in which they do not matter, in which you actually have limited action at the social level that do have longer-term implications for those specific communities, and it's not a question of a scale, let's say, in that sense. We will also talk a lot about media, technology, and systems of social innovation, but in what way can the human mind become an instrument to be used for social innovation? What types of investments in human capital in the developing world create the conditions for social innovations? I know you all have your own questions, ideas, strategies, and stories, and I sincerely look forward to hearing all of them. Again, thanks for joining us today, and I look forward to a lively and provocative discussion. I would now like to introduce our moderator for the first panel. Okay, because there was Chrystia Freeland, who will lead us into the first conversation of today, entitled Searching for Social Innovations, Learning from the Past. Okay, thank you.
And since it's the first of several panels, we'll provide a little bit of background on the format. As you can see, we are trying to innovate a bit in at least the seating arrangements, both for the panelists and for the audience, and we hope this is a little more conducive to conversation and not so much formality. So we will also, because we've provided detailed biographies on each of the speakers, not be giving extended introductions, but just to remind you of who is participating in each conversation. So in their first panel, Chrystia Freeland will be talking with Iman Bibars, who is the Vice President of Ashoka Global and the Regional Director of Ashoka Arab World, as well as the founder of one of the first women's organizations in Egypt, the Association for the Development and Enhancement of Women. And she'll be joined by Salo Kozlovsky, who's an assistant professor of international development at the Wagner School of Public Service at NYU. And finally, Maura O'Neill, who is the senior counselor to the administrator of USAID for Innovation. So welcome, and we really look forward to this first conversation.
Okay, thank you very much. And I have one question. This is all on the record, right? Yes, it's all being recorded and stuff. Okay, I always like to warn people about that before panels begin. So anything you say can be used and will against you. I was really excited when Anya invited me to moderate this, because I think that this subject is really one of the most interesting and most important in the world today. I was really excited also by the panel which the fabulous organizers assembled. You know, we have North Africa and the Middle East, we have Brazil, we have Washington, but also more importantly, maybe even Seattle and the wonderful innovation that happened there that Mauro was really a part of before going into government. So I think we're going to have a great conversation. Our idea that we agreed on over email, the four of us, was we wouldn't have long presentations. I'm going to try to engage the panel in conversation for the first part of our time, and then we really want to spend a lot of time having a conversation with everybody here. So please prepare lots of questions and have lots of remarks to make. I'm just going to start by saying Jose began by noting that we're all being encouraged to tweet our remarks. And since we're talking about social innovation and its impact, I had a live example in my life this morning, just waking up and looking on Twitter. For those of you who follow Russia, you will see that on Twitter in Russia, the #2 trending comment, I just checked a minute ago, #2 trending hashtag is Shuvalov Zhulik, which means Shuvalov thief. Shuvalov is the deputy prime minister, and he had to disclose his income a couple of days ago. The Wall Street Journal wrote a piece about it, and it turns out that his wife, who is a stay-at-home mother, earned more than $10 million in 2010. As we saw in the fall, very, very effectively. What was really fun for me about watching this happen on Twitter was it was led by Navalny, who is probably the leading social activist right now, very, very active on LiveJournal, very active on Twitter. And at a certain point, he started retweeting comments by people who don't read Russian, saying, Shuvalov Zhulik, what does this mean? And saying, let's move over to English so people understand. And so now they're trying to promote the hashtag Shuvalov thief. And they're doing it by tweeting comments like, Lady Gaga kissed Shuvalov thief, Justin Bieber's new song is Shuvalov thief, and so on. So you guys can watch it all on Twitter later today. Anyway, so that's my story. And I thought a good way of opening up the conversation might be to ask each of our panelists to give us one example of social innovation that you've been involved in or that you think is particularly important and interesting for us to talk about. Mara, you want to start?
Okay. So when President Obama appointed Raj Shah as the administrator, he said, come partner with me to reimagine foreign assistance. And my first day of work was the Haiti earthquake. And so, and that was on a Wednesday night. And as you might think, the most important things are search and rescue first, and actually water second, because you start losing people by the hour on that. The airport at Port-au-Prince, when the earthquake happened, darkness was starting, and so we didn't actually know. So we planned all night, not knowing whether we'd be able to get any relief in through the airport or through the ports, because we didn't know. At the first flyover, we realized that the port was destroyed, so there was nothing going to come in by ship. The control tower was down, but basically the runway was in pretty good shape. But it is, the Haitians were not, had not a lot of experience in maximizing the amount of planes that could be landed. And if Americans or others take over the airspace, that's essentially an act of war. And so the Haitians were struggling with it, and in the first day, they only got 25 planes in. And that was the only way, besides over the road from the Dominican Republic, that things were going to get in. So, and there was 3 million people affected, and so that wasn't working. So they turned it over to the U.S., but on the first day that they turned it over to us, which was Saturday, everybody and their brother wanted to land, and the water filtering equipment did not get in, so it got grounded in the Turks Caicos. So here we were on Saturday, hundreds of thousands of people at risk of dying by the hour because there was no clean water. And so we, our team of people who do disaster response procured water by trucks in the Dominican Republic. But an incredibly innovative team realized that they knew that chlorine would help reduce waterborne diseases and make water clean. And so they also knew that in every single natural disaster, there is a huge spike in diarrhea. The issue is how much diarrhea, not much, not whether. So the person procuring the water also said, you have to distribute chlorine tablets at the time in which you distribute this water. And miraculously, there was an 11% reduction in the amount of diarrhea post the earthquake than there was prior to it. So this is somebody who acted, who brought 2 pieces of information. I need water, I need chlorine. He figured out how to mash those up, have it happen in real time, and we had dramatic results. So that's a near-term one.
That's a wonderful example. Where did he get the chlorine tablets, and how did he make sure that people actually used them?
Well, we know they used them because of the impact.
But how did he get people to do that?
Oh, he wrote it into the driver had to do it. So the driver of the water truck had to distribute the chlorine tablets. And I don't actually know where he got the chlorine tablets.
Okay, well, great story. Iman.
Okay. Does this work? I hope so. Anyway. That's better. Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be here. And you should have warned me about being recorded, because I spent half an hour complaining against the American government's U.S. aid policy in Egypt to Maureen. But anyway.
I think your private conversation.
Well, it's okay. It's still the U.S. aid. I'm very glad to be here with the social innovation as the topic, especially that I come from Ashoka, where social entrepreneurship main criteria is being creative and being innovative. And I have 61 stories in Egypt to talk about, or 3,000 stories of Ashoka Fellows all over the world. But I'll only say one, don't worry. And the one I think, because she's one of the newest fellows really, is this young woman, Palestinian, from Hebron, not very, I mean, she just finished intermediate education, and she decides that all these women there in this tiny little village are very poor, have no access to the markets, have no access to education, that the microcredit programs that are around are providing credit, but with a very high interest rate, And these women don't even have a place to market, they don't have experience, and they're really not allowed to leave the market, to the village, because of conservative attitudes. So she doesn't speak English. Fida, this woman, doesn't speak English, does not read English, and decides on her own to start what we would call, among ourselves, business incubators and a venture capitalist firm. This woman decides that, okay, she divides the women. Some of them have beehives, so they make honey. Some of them have dairy, whether it's cows or sheep or whatever, so that there is the ones who are going to produce milk. And some of them are planting in small gardens herbal medicine. She gets technical assistance. She gets a loan. She gets technical assistance so that they can come and help them produce better and do better production, but also packaging and marketing. And she opens markets not only in Jerusalem, but Jordan and Dubai. And decides, I'm not going to give these women credit, and they're not going to be working for me. I'm going to give them all this training, and then I will let them start their own small businesses, and I will take 20%, as a venture capitalist. And when we met her, before she was elected as Ashoka Fellow, she had done this with 120 women, was able to sell the milk and the honey as I said, in Jordan and in Jerusalem. But now she has 750, she was just elected last year, and 750 already small businesses working with 1,200 women in another village, and she's exporting to Dubai. I mean, for me, I am more than impressed with this young lady who is now making 20% and being able to work with more than 2,000 women and empowering them economically, but also giving them voice and the control over their lives.
Okay, that's a great example. I have two questions. So where did she get her starting capital?
She got a loan from her, actually it's very interesting, because she got a loan from her mother-in-law, which is very interesting.
In all society.
I know society. And she got a loan from her mother-in-law. She sold her own gold, like the gold that her, the way you save in the villages is you buy gold. Since you're a kid, your parents keep on buying your little gold. So, I mean, it's not a lot of money. And the gold of her sister and the gold of her sister-in-law. So it was the family thing. But really, she started with something like less than $1,000 when she started. Now she's working in something like, I think the last thing I heard was she was able to get more money and she reached $80,000 or $100,000, because she's working more. So, and this is in 2 years. And she's an Ashoka Fellow, of course. And I'm happy to tell you that Ihab Abdu, who's going to speak at 4:45, is an Ashoka Fellow, and Joachim, the man who's going to speak on lunch, is also an Ashoka Fellow. So we have a lot of wonderful stories.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask you one more question about this story. So you started off the account by explaining to us that women in this village had very limited access to markets. So how did this woman open that up? How did she get that first access?
She went out, one of the things that Fida did, and at the beginning, because there was a long story, she went out to the nearby villages, found out when are there, you have village markets, like on a Tuesday, like a free market here. So, but it's for all the people. So this village had the Tuesday market. This other village has the Monday market. So she started by a couple of jars of honey and whatever, going every week to the markets around. Then she discovered that there is a bigger market than supermarkets in Jerusalem, east and west, by the way. So she works on both sides. And she started by going to one supermarket with owned by a man who's decided to take from her, but he needed some health stuff, so she had to go to the Ministry of Health in the two places, in the east and west of Jerusalem, in order to be able to get license. And she got the license. I mean, it took her we reached her after she's been working for 2 years before production, because she had to do all these licenses, because she had to get the health license. So, but she went walking to the villages around. She went to every market, the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday markets, to start selling. And then she went to the Jerusalem market. But once she went to the Jerusalem market, and it was known in a couple of supermarkets, a guy in Jordan found out. And in Dubai, it was a contact through us, because she was already elected. So we contacted someone we know, and that's what Ashoka does, providing stipend, visibility, networking, and support. So, and we try to connect people.
Okay, I hope you have samples of the honey that you brought with you for
Anytime.
And just, I do have one last question.
Yeah.
What was the reaction of the husbands and of the mother-in-law as they've become successful?
The mother-in-law loved having her money back and more, and a lot of presents. The husband, which was interesting, because there were some tensions at some point, but what she did, which was very bright, was she started a business for him with animal husbandry, you know, so that he gets off her back.
Very far away in the mountains. Yeah. Okay, Salo.
Thank you. And this is all over the past 2 years.
When she started selling it, the research and all the work that was done was a year before, like finding the licenses and going to the markets. But yeah, when she
Okay, I'm
started-
gonna. So it was a year of research and then 2 years of work, just in case people couldn't hear. Iman.
No, I'm asking this because I'm gonna tell a story. It has a different kind of horizon, and it's, I mean, it obviously based on my research. That's the only thing I know about. So you're gonna have to endure. Of those I know there are other people here from Brazil are familiar with Brazil, and you can go a couple pages in the Brazilian newspapers today without reading about the prosecutors and how they are present everywhere, kind of bringing lawsuits to protect women's rights and neighborhoods' rights and protect the environment and labor and anti-corruption. It's just everywhere, and they're very, very present. And there are many reasons not to like them, but there are many, many reasons to admire and see that they do a very positive work in protecting the vulnerable and pushing the country forward. And the story that I want to tell of social innovations, how kind of that came about. And I started to dig into the story. How did this agency came to be so powerful and so present in the country today? And the prosecutors tell kind of a superficial version of the story. So in '88, Brazil passed a new constitution, and that's how the constitution gave us these rights, to these powers, these legal powers. And when you kind of scratch the surface of that, what you find is that, in fact, the actual fight started with a group of committed, somewhat leftist prosecutors who were very unhappy about being public servants in a low-profile organization. I did not join the government to be a like small kind of sidestepped, inconsequent, in not really central agent in promoting positive change. And they started mobilizing, creating a social movement of bureaucrats. And those two things we don't usually put together in the same phrase. We don't think of bureaucrats as committed activists. But that happens a lot. That's not the only case if you look into history. And that's part of the story in this case. And then when I asked them where they got that idea to do that, I said, well, my father was a prosecutor in the 30s, and he tried to start a social movement back then, and him and his friends, they would meet, and they would kind of had this study groups. And so he had a very long, I couldn't go before that, but maybe went even further back. So it's a social innovation that has a very long root, and I think that goes well with the panel of the past of social innovation. And it only took off in the 70s, leading up to the 80s. But it also only took off because they were not by themselves. They joined forces with all sorts of other democrat groups emerging through the redemocratization of Brazil. Women's rights groups and unions and neighborhood associations and environmental activists and church groups. And the prosecutors would tell me, well, I would go to this small town, and I just arrived, I don't know what's going on. First person, the priest knocks on my door to tell me what the problem is with the halfway house and how the prison is understaffed and how there's all kinds of human rights abuses. So it's a story of transformation that on one side has these activists, bureaucrats, changing the organization from within. And on the other side, alliances with these groups in civil society, which are supposed to be very weak. You don't think of civil society historically as being a massive agent of, I mean, maybe it's the only agent of change, but in episodes, kind of peaks and valleys. And this is a story of a painstaking, slow, kind of gradual, establishing these alliances and promoting this change. And another facet of this story is how the prosecutors are very fancy people. They make very high salaries for public servants. They dress in fancy suits, and they talk in fancy language, and they have PhDs in law, and they are very high status. And the union leaders and the neighborhood association and the sort of indigenous people's rights, these are the opposite of that. They are kind of not high income, not high status. When they get together, the intelligence of the action comes from the people on the ground, like who know what's going on and who knows the history, who have been in this struggle for many, many years. And the prosecutor brings the muscles. So the prosecutor is just, it's in many cases, the legal muscle to the brains which are provided by these low status, low income, low formal education groups. And this it's another unlikely feature of this alliance that promoted the change that you see today. And I did to substantiate the story, I did a search. I got a little, so maybe there's another piece of innovation. I got somebody to do a code in software code to mine the Brazilian newspapers from 1920 to today to search for all mentions of when prosecutors were mentioned in the newspaper to kind of track this change. And you see kind of from the 1920s to the 1970s, very little. 70s to 90s, kind of a change. And from the 90s on, an explosion. So today, if anybody wants to understand change in Brazil, these are central actors. But they did not come from the sky. They come from this painstaking process of mobilization from within, alliances with outside actors, and civil society, which is not something that I typically think of when I think of social innovation. But if you're thinking about social change, the social innovation goes through that route inevitably. So that's the story I wanted to share.
Wonderful story. And I love how different each of the stories is. So my first question to you, Salo, is you talked about these prosecutors being fancy guys with PhDs in law and so on. As they became more effective, have the private business interests started trying to hire them?
Well, it happens some, but it doesn't seem to happen a lot. I don't have a full answer. They make very good salaries from day one.
The prosecutors?
Yes.
Even compared to lawyers in private practice?
Oh, it depends. If you're a junior lawyer in private practice, you make very little money. If you're a senior partner, you make 10 times as much as a prosecutor makes. But the lifetime earnings and the security that you have in the job and the status that you have in the job, it's not that clear that's a big advantage.
So there's not a big revolving door?
No, because different from the US, the way it works, that's an entrance exam. That mostly people around 28, 29, they take this entrance exam to get to be a prosecutor. And there's no lateral entry. You start from the bottom and you move up. And these people study for a couple of years to pass this exam. You have 10,000 candidates for 50 spots. So once you're in, you kind of stay. There is some movement, people go into politics, people do other things, but not a lot.
And what has the response, I mean, this is particularly business interests have been hit by the activism of the prosecutors. What has their response been?
Prosecutors are it's a varied bunch also. In many ways, many cases they defend business interests to law and order kind of interests. In other cases, the business, they hate them. If you're trying to establish a big infrastructure project, and it takes twice or 3 times or 10 times longer to get the approvals because the prosecutors are hitting on the courts every day, they are not happy.
My last question for you about your activist prosecutors. I loved at the beginning of the story you explaining to us that these prosecutors, they didn't like the fact that they were kind of low status within the government in this sort of, obscure part of the government, not really visible. Do they feel sort of as a group that they have achieved their goal? Are they proud to be now spearheading this?
Well, I think so. They're very proud. And that's an interesting anecdote in that. I started this research by getting permission from the prosecutor office in São Paulo to sit at the training for new prosecutors. So as soon as you're hired, you have a 2-week, 6 days a week, so from 8 in the morning to 6 p.m., intensive training. And I'm going to go and sit on this training and sit on the back. And I was the only person taking notes because they all had just passed the exam. They were so happy and kind of. And I thought that what I would hear the most was be brave, be bold, go out in the world and do these fancy things and enact positive change and just like push forward the good work that we've been doing. And every day I would be surprised that what I would hear the most is, be cautious, don't do anything stupid, don't do anything funny, don't ruin the fantastic reputation that we had already achieved, don't be foolish. And so in a sense, instead of giving me answers, it heightened the puzzle. Like, so if nobody's encouraging them to do, if the senior ones are not encouraging them to do it, why does anybody do it? So in a sense, so answering your question is, yes, they're very proud, and they're very protective of their reputation. The flip side of this is that by having a high reputation, they are very afraid of losing it. So that gives you a different side to this coin. And that's where the civil society comes into play, to a very large extent, pushing them against being complacent.
Can I ask a question? But I think the question also is there a collective sense that they have done a movement? I mean, are they now just proud because they have a nice status in Brazil, or do they have a collective conscious feeling that there has been a movement that really upgraded their status?
Well, it's both things, and it's also there's a division. This is not a cohesive, homogeneous government agency. You still have a current of activist prosecutors who think that they aren't doing enough, that they want to do more, and they feel a little bit sidetracked within the ranks. And you have the majority who are just proud and just like, you know what, we've done it. Just sit back and enjoy. And there's this fight goes on every day.
One of the things I loved about your story, Saulo, is that you have right away taken us to the question of where does social innovation and government intersect. And you spoke with some sort of surprise about, can government bureaucrats be leaders of social innovation? And I thought, wait a minute, I have one such person sitting right next to me. So Mara, I'd like you to talk about that a little bit. I mean, are you observing in Washington a similar sort of empowerment of the social innovator bureaucrats that Sala has documented in Brazil?
I think so. I think this has been a priority of President Obama's, and so he created the first policy directive on development in 50 years, and he said, let us imagine the conditions where AID is no longer needed, and let's do it with economic growth and game-changing innovations. So he was deliberate about choosing people like me for a number of his departments, and then he realized how difficult the job would be, and we might, after the 5th day, cut and run. And so we have a support group that we meet at the White House once a month among the agencies and people that I do, and we share best practices and so to try and develop that. But and so it is a key part. You also have to invest in it. We decided to knock off a venture capital model of stage financing for game-changing innovations. And we named it the Development Innovation Venture Fund. And so it has proof of concept funding, but even at that phase, we want to see that it's going to scale to tens of millions. Then stage 2, build to scale, rigorously evaluate stage 3. And we believe ideas come from all different places. I think that's a real key of government innovation, is that we can't decide that just bringing a one-off like me into it is going to change the bureaucracy. You've got to fundamentally open it up to source and scale innovations from the private sector, from the government, from all sorts of people around, in our case, around the world.
Okay, that sounds really good, but how do you do it?
How do you do it? So you've got to change you've got to invest in it. You've got to change the incentives, and that's really it. So and you have to be focused on results, because I think government always isn't focused on results. So, for example, and you have to partner. So, Iman was talking about this woman who's had this enlightened mother-in-law and sisters who gave all their gold, and then you asked her about the husband. Well, one of the big problems that women have is to actually control their money. And so oftentimes they can make this money, and then the man takes the money away. So we believe that the biggest game changer in all of development is going to be mobile money. And that is, there's 500,000 bank branches, but there's 5 billion phones. So if you can change that mobile phone. And so what we've done is we've said to all of our implementing partners, we want you to start paying people through mobile money. So we know that in order to create that ecosystem, we did it in Haiti after the earthquake, we now are on track to have 5 million transactions being done through mobile phones. So we have to look at how do we create our incentives, how do we use our purchasing power, how do we use our convening power to get the regulatory piece right, and all of those are necessary if you really want to have game-changing innovations.
I love this sort of image I have in my mind of all of the beleaguered inside government social innovators having to drag themselves to the White House once a month for kind of your consciousness raising moment. What's the thing that you guys most complain about when you get together? What's the thing that you say, oh my God, this has been the hard thing this past month?
Can I add a question?
Yeah.
How do you guys find each other? How did this meeting come about? What's the story behind it?
So actually, the person who heads personnel for the White House, they're the ones that appointed us to begin with. So they knew where we were and brought us together. So
you're not like the Brazilian prosecutors who were kind of self-appointed. You were actually sort of seated.
Exactly.
Fifth column innovators within the bureaucracy.
But interestingly enough, we decided, the White House decided they also needed the career equivalent. So they have just created the same group of career officials in each of these agencies to have that sort of sharing of best practices. I think the most frustrating thing for us is probably that in the government or in any large organization, because I think it's true of the private sector, there's hundreds of people that can say no, but people are very reluctant to put their neck out and say yes. So I think the toughest thing is, how do you move this super tanker, and how do we provide political and other cover so that career bureaucrats can actually do the right thing, that they know how to do. Interestingly enough, they actually know what a lot of these innovations are. They just haven't had the institutional support. And that's, I think, the thing that we talk about a lot.
How about sort of social dynamics within the agencies? Do those career bureaucrats hate you guys?
Well, I'd say that it's a little unusual because AID was the punching bag prior to us coming in, and so people were saying it's broken and it's not effective and blah blah. And listen, I'm not saying that we're perfect, but we have done a lot of amazing things around the world, and we haven't really done very good at telling our story. And so I actually think that a lot of the agency, at least the more progressive, were sort of saying, wow, now we have somebody who really wants to give us a seat at the table in national security conversations, who will really lean forward with a kind of expertise. So I think that that's been the case. Now, obviously, we're breaking China bowls. And when we break those China bowls, the people that had those before aren't necessarily wanting to see that happen. So, do I regularly take arrows out of my back or my thigh? Absolutely. You have to be a social innovator, either in government or outside, you have to be incredibly courageous. And you just have to believe passionately and relentlessly that the result is worth it. Otherwise, go home.
Maura, you raised in your remarks something that we discussed over email, this point about how what's really important and a big challenge is to get to scale. And sort of we started our discussion with some great individual stories, but what really makes those stories matter is if you can achieve scale. Would you like to just comment on that quickly, and then I'd love to hear from Iman and Salo how you get to scale?
That's probably been the most difficult thing, is because everybody suffers from pilotitis. And so we see a little thing and a researcher writes a paper or somebody does something, but how do we capture those and institutionally scale them? And so I think the key is you got to think about scale at the beginning. As you said, I'm from Seattle. A lot of great coffee shops. What Howard Schultz did is he imagined 30,000 coffee shops on day one. And he built the first one, and he built a repeatable process. And that's how we need to really do it. So that's why I say we stood up mobile money in Haiti. We stood it up in Afghanistan because the banks were falling apart and there was a lot of corruption. And so we started facilitating payment of police officers through mobile money. And they got, quote, a 30% raise. That's how much we knew was getting skimmed off of the top. And so think about scale from the very beginning.
Tell us the police story in a little more detail. That's interesting.
So about half of the police and military don't show up to work on a lot of days in Afghanistan. And oftentimes it's because they have to walk a long ways because they get their cash or whatever. But half of the civil servants in Afghanistan are paid in cash. So we worked with a mobile operator to have those salaries given to them on their mobile phone, and they could go to a local agent and get the cash. And so it turns out that, as I said, they thought the mobile companies were giving them a 30% raise. They were actually giving them the salary that they were supposed to get. But the commander, whose salary was really $200 a month, on average was getting $2,000 a month because he was taking a little cut of everybody that worked for him. Now, we did have one incident where the commander came into the cash agent with a handful of mobile phones and said, I would like all the salaries from these mobile phones. So we worked with them to put controls on how many mobile phones you could show up with.
And what's the limit?
So it's one, and we also did cash outlays. The other thing I think is really cool about something that the mobile operators and us are working on, there's 300 million women at the bottom of the pyramid less who own phones than men, and so this mobile revolution is incredible, but poor women are being left out. So we worked with them to develop business cases about why mobile operators would want to do this. And so they did focus groups. This is hot off the press. They did focus groups with men and women. The women said in there, oh yeah, mobile money's interesting. Then they did focus groups with just women. And they said, we are desperate for mobile money because our money gets stolen. And so what the industry has done is you have your mobile phone and you have a PIN, but they've given you the opportunity to have lots of different PINs. So if your husband says, hun, let me see how much money you have in your account, you can do a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 PIN, and then you can have a 7, 8, 9. That's where you hide all your money. And so we think that there's all sorts of scaling innovation that can happen that will be game changers.
Has that been introduced yet?
It
hide from the husband?
Yeah. The Fundamo, which Visa bought, is one of the largest mobile money platforms in the world. It's based in Cape Town, and they have just introduced that. And so some mobile operators. It also has the benefit of a savings. So you could have a health account. You could have a birthday account. You could have a school account. So it isn't just hiding your money from your spouse. But what was culturally so interesting to us is the difference between focus groups that were only women and how desperate they were for this kind of application versus when you ask them in a room of men and women.
Okay. Iman, examples of scale, thoughts on scale?
Yeah, thoughts on scale. Because also, I think there are a couple of things I'd like to raise here. When we're talking about social innovation in Ashoka, we're talking about social entrepreneurship, which sometimes people are talking about social enterprise, which means we're talking about businesses. But in most cases, it's not really businesses. It is social entrepreneurship for battered women. So you come with a new idea on how to address the issues of battered women, or how to address the issue of girls who are dropping out of school, or how you address the issues of people with disabilities that are not integrated in the labor market. And in our street children, so many of these stories where at the end of the day, you really cannot have an economically sustainable model. But you can have a sustainable idea. And this is where we differentiate, where somebody's idea becomes so sustainable that it is replicated, not necessarily by the person. And I always use the example of even Grameen Bank, which is the first microcredit program in the world. What Muhammad Yunus did was not just develop a microcredit program. What he did was make women credible, make the poorest of the poor women acceptable in the minds of everybody that they can have access to credit. And he developed a very simple model whereby everyone in the world, then like us when we started 25 years ago in Egypt, were just imitating this model without even meeting Muhammad Yunus. We have also an Ashoka Fellows, an Indian one called Jeru. And Jeru started the first kind of hotline for abused kids, that the kid himself or herself, through a mechanism of having ambulances and NGOs and people to support, would call in and say, either my parents are abusing me, either I'm a street child, either the teacher is abusing me, physical or sexual abuse, and somebody will come and pick him up. And what was wonderful again about what Jeru did was she developed 1 or 5 principles, like you have to have an ambulance, for example, you have to have 2 staff members, you have to have this and that, and then she franchised without even, franchised in a social sense, not in an economic sense, and all the provinces of India, all the governorates had that. Not only has she spread the child line in India, it was spread in Egypt, it was spread in several other countries. And to us, this is scaling the idea without necessarily being a person to scale it yourself. To what extent is your idea meeting the needs of a lot of groups all over the world? To what extent is what we call the business model, which doesn't necessarily mean business financial model, is simple enough that people can take it and fly? And we have seen many of these models with people who have really come from the ground and decided to address a serious issue. So the scaling up, in our opinion, is really the scaling up of an idea, of how it was simple, how it was needed, how it could be feasible in many of the countries, and how did it address a real problem.
Okay, Salo, thoughts on scale?
Sure. So, well, it's what I would say is a kind of provocation to researchers like myself, in which a different type of scale is scaling up. It's not just going from pilot, small, kind of one municipality to the country, but also government in and government out. The program stays and continues. It's very common that a new president, a new mayor, a new governor gets elected. And you know what? Just get rid of all the flagship projects from the previous guy and let's start new ones. And in some cases, that means totally getting rid of the old stuff, independent of what's working or not. And in some cases, it means just change the name so I can claim credit, but continue with what already had been built. And it's important to understand what drives these decisions and why some programs continue despite changes in government, and other programs get kind of discontinued, scraped and thrown into the trash bin. And again, the bureaucrats play a very large, the career people play a very important role, tend to play a very important role in this, because they're the ones who stay. And the smart ones, the crafty ones, they know how to craft the program that's gonna tie the hands of the next person, that they cannot, in good faith, discontinue it. At most, they can change the name. Anyway, but there's a lot of variables in here that we don't know a lot about. Why some programs continue and others don't. So it's not scaling from reach, it's just talking
Scaling
about
over
permanence, which is, I don't think we know enough about this, but it's a very important area to know more.
Do you have any ideas for U.S. healthcare reformers on this matter?
Well, that would be the reverse. How do you discontinue? But no, I don't.
I just want to add that I think Iman said something really, really important, and that is that simplicity is key to scaling. And so understand what the real heart of the idea is, because then, as she said, even people you don't know can take it and run with it, and that's where the magic happens.
I also think, going back to the bureaucrats, I think one of the most interesting things, and you were starting by the twittering and I'll go back to the revolution in Egypt, which everybody knows that the Facebook and the social media was very, was really the basis why people got together and were able to go to the square. But what was fascinating also was the reaction of the governments afterwards. I mean, we have very temporary governments since then, but everybody has a Facebook, has a Twitter. Everybody's trying to respond, which is overloading the thing because they're saying things that are not really that relevant sometimes, but it's also everybody's trying to reach the young people. Everybody's trying to say whatever they're doing every day as government, which has not been the case in the Middle East before. I mean, I didn't have a Facebook except 4 days before the revolution anyway. But to have government officials really come in and Twitter what they're doing, to have government officials come in Egypt and have Facebook. Even the army now in Egypt has its own Facebook where it's trying to defend itself. So, you know, this is brilliant.
Okay, that's really interesting. I'm going to ask you guys one last question, sort of jumping off from that, and then I'm going to throw it open. So please prepare your questions. Coming off of your point about revolution, most of the social innovation we talked about was very much within the system. It was about something led by prosecutors, led by USAID, even if causing tensions in the family. Few governments are going to say, we support husbands taking away all their money from their wives and beating them up. Most won't say that. But what about social innovation that is explicitly anti-regime? Social innovation in Egypt before the revolution, the social innovators I was talking about in Russia. How does that work? If you're a foreign government, what is your attitude towards it? If you're an NGO that maybe is sympathetic towards these revolutionaries, how do you relate to those guys?
I want to tell you a story. We have one Ashoka fellow in Saudi Arabia. You know, what is fascinating is she's a woman. This woman decided, again, you know, women cannot drive in Saudi Arabia and they cannot work anywhere without covering even their face, not just their hair, which you can imagine was a disaster when I was there for a trip. But anyway.
What happened?
I had a fight everywhere. I mean,
Did you refute? What was your position? What was your attitude?
No, I had to cover my hair, but I couldn't cover my face. But I had a fight with the immigration guy. I had a fight in every restaurant I entered because I forgot. I would go from the main door when you have to go from the side door for family or whatever. And I had a fight. And my assistant who got me the thing to put on my hair had a silk one. Usually you have to have a cotton one. So it was slipping, so I had men screaming at me in the street. It was a disaster. You know, but anyway, so this woman who comes from a good, like, upper middle class family in Saudi Arabia, who got educated, and they're very well educated, the women in Saudi Arabia, but they stay home. She discovered, I'm not sure how she started, but she discovered that there are pockets of poverty in the middle of Jeddah, which is one of the a big city there, and she discovered many pockets of poverty, areas with hundreds of people, thousands of people, with women and men, where there is female and male prostitution, where people are killing themselves because they don't have money, where people are having drugs and whatever. And she decided to take a video camera, and take pictures of this. I mean, videotape that and give it to the princes and the sheikhs and the media, of course, which refused to publish it. And she was able to create a movement. Like a lot of the young other women learned about it and they decided this is untrue. And she discovered just in Jeddah 12 of these pockets of poverty. And we elected her to be a fellow. She created committees in these areas which has men and women. Now what is fascinating is we elected her, but we also had to get her out of prison every 6 weeks or 4 weeks. She was arrested every 4 weeks because they discovered she has nothing, she's not covering her face, because she's speaking to men. You cannot sit with men in the same room, you know, if you're a Saudi Arabian. So she was sitting with men and women, so she was arrested every 6 weeks. And the only thing that helped me, I went to Georgetown, and there was a Saudi person with me. I didn't realize then, 100 years ago, but she's like a princess and married to a prince or whatever. And I called her and discovered she's very important. And so she's the one who helps me every time get Saadiya out of prison. I mean, and I'm serious. The maximum she stayed out of prison was 6 weeks. Of course, nobody wants to marry her. She's not married. Her father is a little bit supportive. Her brother has tried to beat her several times. But But this is a woman, she's an Ashoka Fellow. We support her all the time. We get her, of course, local lawyers, by the way. We cannot get her international lawyers because this backfires. And we have this, my friend who, by luck, was a princess in Georgetown, who comes in and gets her out of prison every 6 weeks. I mean, you know, so talking about innovation out of the system, I have a lot of these stories.
Any other thoughts on innovation out of the system, or should we start taking questions?
I can give you a quick response. It's just you frame your question as being within, I mean, agreeing with the system, or being within the system, or being totally in opposition, like regime change. And I'm not sure if that's the best, or the most helpful way to think about it. I mean, not that I know, what I know about what happened in Egypt and in the Middle East is just through the newspapers, but the big turning point was when from being outside, it became within, when the army decided to side with the protesters. So that was, the fact that it was from within made it even more powerful. So just to think how to make it totally against the regime may not be the best way, and especially because the governments are very fragmented. You think the government is one thing. In fact, there's all kinds of different internal divisions. There's conservative prosecutors, there are activist prosecutors. When I was working in Brazil, the Ministry of Environment, the biggest fight was against the Ministry of Energy, and people in Brasilia didn't trust their own field agents in the Amazon, so we had to rely on the Greenpeace activists. There's so many cleavages and divisions that I don't think that's the best way to think about it.
Okay, all comes down to winning over the right civil servants, right?
So I think there's a couple things I've seen that are really exciting. There, in Afghanistan elections in September of 2010, there was some researchers out of UC San Diego that recruited local Afghans, and they were at 471 polling sites. For half of them, and they took a picture of what the tally was at the end of the day, and they compared it to what the national tally was. But in half of those, they delivered in the middle of the voting day a letter to the poll manager saying, we're going to take a picture of this, and we're going to compare it, and we're going to sort of let it be known if those actually differ. So that resulted in 60% less election fraud, and they also were able to figure out how much ballot stuffing there was, which is about 25%. That was in September. They took a little bit of money that they left over, got a little more, did it in Uganda in February, repeated the results, 50% reductions, and now Qualcomm's thinking about putting it on the handsets so that people around the world in local elections can begin
putting
to
what
use
on
this.
the handsets?
Putting the ability to actually take a picture and send it to a database so that all that analysis can be done. So it's those kinds of tools. There's also somebody in India that created a site called I think it's called itookabribe.com. And so I think that you're absolutely right.
I think I paid a bribe.com.
I paid a bribe, okay. And so I knew I didn't quite have it right. And so I think that all these things beyond Twitter
that's less comfortable to
Yeah,
admit.
exactly.
yeah, I meant, that's right. I paid a bribe. What was I saying? Anyway, so I think that you're absolutely right, that that beyond Facebook and Twitter, this new technology is just exploding in the hands of average citizens to really speak up and take a stand with respect to governance.
I wanted to just ask a quick question about mobile money, which is what's to stop tax evaders, drug dealers, money launderers from having lots of different accounts?
So we actually work really closely with the Treasury Department, the anti-money laundering, terrorist financing, so to put a lot of controls into how many transfers can go into one account, what the limits are, know your customer regulations. So we actually are working closely to try and, listen, bad guys are going to do bad things. So I'm not suggesting that just as we haven't been able to completely eliminate that in the existing banking system, but we're completely on top of that kind of
risk.
risk.
So I guess what I'm asking then is it an unintended consequence of this form of social innovation that it's actually going to strengthen the deeply troubled financial sector in Afghanistan?
We actually think quite the opposite. We think that
no, I mean that the mobile phones are going to become, is this a good thing, right? That you thought you were innovating, helping these women, but in fact what you're also doing is strengthening the financial sector?
Yeah, we think that we are standing up a different financial structure that actually strengthens the banks. And in Kenya, that's what we saw, is more that actually when you saw M-Pesa, which is theirs, it actually caused a lot of people to open formal bank accounts. So where we think it's going to have the biggest impact, or where we see it having the biggest impact, is taking cash out of the system, which is the most inherently least transparent and most corrupting force.
And just as a follow-up to Anya's question, presumably the telco companies love this, right?
They do. They do.
Okay, more questions? Please.
I was very excited about this prosecutor story, and I wanted to learn more about how you mentioned that the prosecutors gain ground with civil society institutions, and I just want to understand the dynamics behind that. Like, which came first? Was civil society strengthened because of the prosecutor movement, or the other way around? And also, something that is cutting across all of the stories you mentioned is the role of the media, right? What are the dynamics? Like, in the case of Saudi Arabia, you mentioned the media refused to publish those videos, but what would happen in a situation where the media is, monopolized and follows the elite and doesn't want to inform the society about those things? So what are the dynamics in these situations?
Okay, so two questions. One about the prosecutors, and the other one maybe I'll ask Iman to answer about the media. Salo, please.
Yes, thank you for a question. In this case, the way that they talk about the story and the documents are being able to dig up and corroborate the story is that it was a fairly simultaneous process. Civil society was re-emerging from being kind of quashed under the Brazilian dictatorship in the 60s and late 60s and 70s. And at the same time, these reformist prosecutors were kind of getting leeway and small victories, legislative victories, giving them small powers in different fronts. And they talk about, we discovered each other. That's the language that they use. The prosecutors discovered.
Sounds like a love story.
Yeah, well, it has some, yeah, that's a good analogy. And these groups in civil society say, well, if we follow the prosecutors, we can't get what we want done. So they have a very symbiotic relationship. The reformist prosecutors, to a large extent, that's not the ideal world. They would like to have all the powers and all the knowledge and all the information within. They see that their trajectory got truncated to trajectory of reform. They wanted to have staff and subordinate people willing to provide all the information that they needed. They couldn't get that. They couldn't reform the way that the organization is managed and run. So to be able to do what they want to do, they had to reach out for allies outside, and that's who they found. So it's kind of fairly happy marriage, but nobody's fully, and people in civil society say the same. I wish we didn't need them. I wish we could bring our class action suits ourselves. I wish we could intervene on our own. Dealing with prosecutors is not easy, but that's what we have to do now. So it's kind of accommodation.
I think this is where innovation played a big role. I think would transform the world, because yes, this is very common. Our media in the Middle East, including Turkey and in other countries, of course it didn't put any of our articles, and of course it didn't put any of our videos. I mean, we never even thought about it. But that's where the YouTube came in. And the YouTube, I think, is one of the revolutions which gave voice to a lot of people. Negative and positive, but it gave a lot of, and for example, we have Halima, who is a woman in Turkey who started a female network of reporters across Turkey to say the stories of abused women all over. We have a woman who's a candidate, I hope she becomes a fellow, from the West Bank, who started something called Nisa FM. And she intentionally made it a radio, not a website, because not everybody, and Nisa means women. So it's really by women, for women who are doing a lot of work. But in addition, we have a lot of the people's newspaper, we have something called The Program. He's imitating Jon Stewart, but in Arabic. And he was always on YouTube, and he was very sarcastic and interesting, but about what's happening. All this underground media, and all the fact that, for example, we were able to monitor elections by the mobiles and put it on Facebook on the spot when there were problems, even by the fundamentalists, the Muslim Brotherhood and the others during the elections. I think the most innovative sector that revolutionized our lives has been the social media and changed our lives completely and made people accountable. So even I take a bribe will be reported, you know. Everybody's accountable. You cannot beat a woman in the streets now by the army or whoever, and nobody will know about it. You know, you cannot put people in prison and nobody will not know about it. You know, we can monitor everything that's happening now, or even in Syria when they're killing the people now. We still it reaches us. In Iran, it reaches us what's happening because one person has the guts to just have a mobile phone and send it in a minute. It's all over the world.
Mara, you want to add anything? Okay, another question?
Yes, hi, thank you. I have two questions for Iman. First of all, how do you make sure that the model is, in the example that you mentioned of this woman who created these incubators, if you looked from the private sector, the government, or the NGO sector, how do you support them to have, so that this model is economically and socially sustainable? First, and second, how do you also support them to basically, you mentioned that this is also a social and a business model. How do you ensure that you can replicate that? How do you document that, and how do you bring it to other places so that there is scalability, but also replicability first of all, and then scalability?
Well, first of all, not every project or idea will be economically sustainable. Fida Turkey is economically sustainable because it's an economic project. And of course, when the process to be elected a fellow, I mean, after the revolutions in the Arab region, what we call the Arab awakening, but all over the world, in 30 years, we have only 3,000 fellows, what we call Ashoka fellows. So it's very difficult to become a fellow. It's a process of 6 to 8 months and sometimes longer, because it's a very mentoring and coaching process whereby we make sure that you are a leading social entrepreneur, you know, whether for profit or not for profit. So one of the things is, first of all, we verify that this is your new idea, it's the idea and yours, and it's new in your region. And we verify that if it's an economic project, that it is sustainable. We get experts to help us. And the process of verification and search and going around, and it's a rigorous process, believe me. It's like we don't sleep, and we have a lot of volunteers and people working with us on it. So that's ensured. And part of what we do once you're elected as a fellow is we provide you with the visibility. So not only is the fellow on our website and international and national and local websites, but we recommend fellows to international awards. So for example, for the last 3 or 4 years, all the awardees of the Skoll and Schwab, especially Schwab Social Entrepreneurship Award, were Ashoka Fellows. 70% all over the world of the Schwab awardees are Ashoka Fellows because we make them visible. We provide. So a lot of it is provide the fellows with a lot of space and time and opportunities. But in addition, we also provide capacity building. Some of it we can do ourselves, and some of it we try, like we have this partnership with McKinsey, with Helen and Nolte, and other groups which provide, pro bono, by the way, services to our fellows so they can scale up. One of the things we do, actually, with SIPA, 3 or 4 years ago, we had an intern, an MBA intern, who came and helped us on documenting some of our work. And we had the workshop group of SIPA came in another year and also documented some of our work. So we have partnership with Columbia, with Stanford, with Harvard, with 4 or 5 universities in the States and others in the UK and other countries, where a lot of the MBA students and other students, graduate students, come in and work on helping us document the cases. So these are some of the answers.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Iman. More questions? I have some questions from Twitter since we've been talking about social media, which we can ask.
I have a question about USAID. In fact, just a couple of things that you mentioned. Have you developed any strategies to have the whole agency innovate from across, so you don't have these bubbles of innovation, so you have some innovative projects, but the whole organization starts being more innovative. So in 10 years or in 4 years or in 1 year, if you have a change of government, you do have the basic DNA of the agency change. I worked in a project in Afghanistan for a year that was mostly funded by USAID, and it was about entrepreneurship and about innovation, but it was very hard to do that within the confines of the funding that we're getting.
Yeah.
So I just wonder what are your strategies, and how long does it take to really do that?
Yeah. So I think you've identified a real critical issue that I'm spending a lot of time on, and that is the good news is we are in 79 countries and we cover 100 countries, and we give our mission directors, that's what we call our country offices, enormous amount of flexibility and autonomy. And that is also a challenge if you are trying to either find something in Afghanistan that would really work in Peru or would work in Uganda. Isn't so easy to do that. Isn't so easy within our contracting to allow you the kind of flexibility that you're working on something and you discover, oh my goodness, this really hunts. Let's figure out how to stop doing this other stuff that's in our contract and put all of our effort in that way. So we're doing a few things, but I'd say it's on our agenda, it's a work in progress, it's tough. But there's two, I think, big important shifts that we're trying to do with this. One is implementation and procurement reform. So to give the people that are out there identifying more flexibility and operate more at the local level, push more money through the local organizations to make that sustainable. And then the second is we believe this issue of sustainability is about us being more catalytic rather than sort of us coming up with the ideas. So for a decade, we've had a partnership program called the Global Development Alliance. We've done about 1,000 of them, but as of this year, in all of our mission directors' goals to get the incentives right, they are asked to put 8% of their program money through that mechanism. And that mechanism has to be a one-to-one match. So instead of just finding a contractor to do something, you have to say, is the market going to validate this as really a great idea by at least matching our money one-on-one? And so we think that's one of the ways that we're going to shift to really say, let's not just stovepipe. Let's see who's out there in the business community, in the government, in the donor and NGO, and what are the ideas that are getting the most traction that together we could grow.
Okay, more questions?
I'm going to take a prerogative here as an organizer to ask a question that I've been wanting to ask this panel for a long time. And Maura, you said something, the word catalytic, and Bill Drayton, the founder of Ashoka, also talks about this idea of teams. And I'm interested to know from your three perspectives, because you really are in some ways an ideal panel for what we had in mind for this conference, which is a researcher, a practitioner, and someone in government. And this concept of how do we collaborate between sectors, between even just disciplinary ideas. But I would like to know from each of you what you see as characteristics of the other in terms of an ideal partnership. So if you were to create catalytic collaborations, what do you seek in the other partnership to make it work? Thanks.
I think it goes back to the team of all teams. Bill Drayton is the founder of Ashoka and the one who coined the term social entrepreneurship 30 years ago. I wasn't born. But anyway.
None of us were.
Good. And the idea of team of all teams, I don't know if any of you have been reading, for example, the IBM new articles on management, because it comes from the idea, and also it's the same of cloud sourcing. It's about cloud, the cloud idea. And the cloud is that now there are no longer these hierarchical programs that, or ways of organizing yourselves. Now the problems are come, and you immediately have to answer, because there is this urgency in everything we do because of the social media and because of the problems and the nature of it. So we have to be task oriented. We have to decide, I want to solve the problem of, let's say, water in Haiti, right? Now, if I am innovative, and if I think of with a team of all teams, I would immediately decide to think of, I need somebody from the government, because they have the money to be able to come in and get us the trucks and the water. I need also a researcher, and who will tell me which type of medicine I will need with the water so that I can get these pills. And I need the practitioner who's going to make the water reach the right people. So I mean, this is the type of it. It's task-oriented. And so I don't need to have a hierarchy of 100 people coming and working for me, whereby by the time we finish something, the Haiti people would have gone somewhere, you know. But we need a task, and we need the team of all teams. This is the team of all teams. Now, the next project, I might not need a government person. I might need 2 researchers and an academic. I might
need a company, for example.
Or a company, or for example, an advocacy person, or a media person. So it depends on your task. And the idea is, we should no longer think of how are we going to create more committees, but we should think of tasks, creating the team of all teams, and dismantling this once the task is over. And it's the cloud management now, which is, yeah.
So somebody once said that all of activity is going to become like Hollywood, which is what you said. We're going to come together with the best of the best around a specific project, and then we're going to go do something else. And I think the key with that team of teams is being honest with ourselves of what we're good at. I used to say, in order to get to our positions, we have to be good at a lot of things, but we're probably only brilliant at 2 things. What I hope you've seen from this person to my left is that she is amazing at what she does. And there is, Ashoka is incredible at being able to identify and find and support practitioners. They will always be better than USAID or the government. And so what we need to do is to say, what are we best in class at, so that we can partner.
So what are you best in class at? What is the government best in class at?
We actually think we're best.
I said money.
We are actually, that is one of the things we're best in class at. But I tell you what we also are good at is convening power. We can get governments, we can get heads of corporations, we can bring a diverse set of people. We have positional power. And that's what our partners continue to tell us that we can do second to none.
And can I be in Hollywood when you do this group in Hollywood?
Yes.
Okay, how about the academics here, the researchers?
So, that's a very tough question, I think. And I have answering two pieces. The first is think of myself, like what should I do and what can I do and how can I be a member of this? And what strikes me on this side is that the logic of being a successful researcher and the logic of being tangible, immediately useful may not necessarily overlap. So
here's what I think.
Sorry, just one last thing. And it changes per person, it changes by discipline, it changes on the stage of your career. So to getting those two to coincide or to operate at the overlap of those two, take some action, like purposeful action, and it's not that easy. So what I would say for the partners is, on one hand, to be patient and to be open, because it's much easier, and that's my connection to the other piece of my answer, it's much easier to do what as a researcher, to continue doing what I've been doing before, and not knowing exactly what's happening in the hallways of government or in social innovation out in the field. I spend a lot of time in the library, in the classroom, and I learn about stuff. Unless I'm doing field work, I learn through the papers or in these experiences. So to be outside and exposed to stuff and counting with patient partners who can answer a lot of very basic questions helps attract
that
researchers.
Helps you, but what do you give them?
And well, so that's the second part of my answer, which is people, not only researchers, but everybody else, they operate within the bureaucracies. And that's one of the standard ways or dominant ways of organizing work life. We talk a lot about networks. We talk about more I was saying that kind of assembling teams is as in a movie production. And that's what a lot of what I saw of how these prosecutors that I studied get stuff done. It's by getting these pieces together in an ad hoc basis, project basis, problem-oriented, and crossing all kinds of boundaries. And they come together as a team for a moment, for one specific task, and each one go back to their own bureaucratic life. And as we're doing the team, they also need to attend back to their own bureaucracies and kind of the needs of feeding the beast. And so one of the things that researchers can bring to this, or what I can speak for myself, is understanding how this works and how this can work better, and identifying some of the flaws, why it's not working, and what does it need to be, what should you provide to make this work. So I was in this meeting a couple months ago at the New Museum about new cities and promoting positive, inclusive change in urban centers, and one of the things that came up is what some people called a community organizer, that museums and agents, or whatever, whoever wants to promote positive change, should have community organizers on staff to go out and do this work of finding and bringing together. And this how the way that this idea evolved to researchers who were in the room talking about the experience of how this works in practice is that community organizer may be the closest to this role, the closest label that we know for this role that doesn't exist. But that's not necessarily precise. And what more was just, maybe you're talking about the movie producer, who's kind of going to call people. But maybe we need a different name. I mean, there's a different job that asking to be done, and doesn't have a place yet, doesn't have a name yet, doesn't have a budget yet. And that's what some of my research, my colleagues' research shows, we should pay attention to that to help convene and promote change.
Okay, we only have 2 minutes left, so you just can have one sentence each.
So I think researchers help keep us honest about what's really working and what's not.
I also think that now, since we are in the world of academia, we also need people to think of innovative way of doing research in the new world. You know, I'm a researcher. I've done a lot of work in research in one of my phases in my life. But I also think that we should be, as we've changed media, we've changed being practitioners, we should also think of how we can do the right research, very rigorous and scientific, but maybe in a different way now since everything is changing. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm now going to give you the quick Twitter questions. One we've already discussed at great length. Can government bureaucrats be social innovators? I think we've said yes. I think so. From Cairo Co-working, and I'll ask everyone to just give me a very brief answer to this one. Is social innovation just another buzzword or a necessary addition to serious work on paradigm change?
I think that is the definition of social innovation. We need to be really careful that improvement is we're at baseball season, improvement is a base hit, social innovation is a home run. And we should be really clear that we're looking for the home runs and grand slams.
I didn't understand, but very good. Sounded great.
You must not be a baseball player.
No, but it sounded good. No, I don't think it's a buzzword anymore. I think it is a necessity, so maybe that is the home run. I think it's a necessity, and I think innovation and creativity has proven to us more than anyone else in the world, not only as Ashokians, but also as Middle Eastern people, that innovation is the way for you to change your life and the world to a better place.
I think I agree with the panel, and that maybe it's just broad enough to accommodate things that would count as buzz, but there's a lot of substance.
Okay.
So I wouldn't dismiss it.
Last question from Twitter. Is financial sustainability a requirement for scaling social innovation? I'll let Salo go first, so you don't always have to be the last guy talking.
Too vague, the question. I don't know. Not everything needs to be financially viable by itself. It can generate positive outcomes without generating money.
I think, again, the scaling up of ideas are different from the scaling up of organizations. And I think we're stuck up into thinking, is this particular NGO sustainable? there are more than 100, I think maybe 70 million people or more now taking credit in different organizations without being linked to Grameen Bank. There are many people who are working on several things in the world. I mean, without being themselves. So scaling up the idea is different than having a particular NGO, particular project being financially sustainable. Empowering youth anywhere in the world does not have to have one NGO being sustainable.
Mara?
I think financial sustainability is essential to scalability. And I don't think you have it without that, but you can scale one of two ways, either through the private sector with a value proposition that people are willing to pay for, or through the public sector where the government adopts it as a public good. But in both cases, financial sustainability is essential.
Okay, and then my final question, which is our concluding one. This is a blitz round. Tell us I asked you guys to start by giving us an example of a social innovation that was interesting and you admired. Tell us the new thing. What's the new exciting thing? Hasn't really worked yet, hasn't really been proven, but that you're really have your eye on.
I've been cared about women all my life. I now am obsessed with girls. I think adolescent girls, you change the future of adolescent girls and you will change the world. So I think that's the new thing. Watch them around the world.
I'll talk to you later about girls' dreams, but I think the newest thing that I think is very important is that every child must master empathy. That without empathy, we cannot be all change makers. We believe now that everyone is a change maker, but if you cannot be a good leader, if you don't have empathy, and I think this is a new thing that we're going to spread.
While people in my area, international development, talk a lot about foreign aid, I think that the big new thing is change from within. When you have countries like Brazil and China and India and South Africa and Indonesia and Thailand who are rich enough and poor enough at the same time to promote change from within.
Okay, 3 exciting new things from a really fabulous panel. Thank you so much. I learned so much.